Greetings, lovers of lore. Thank you for joining me for another installment of the Timestream Chronicles. And I want to give a special early hello to all of my patrons who are seeing this video now with early access. Thank you very much for supporting what I do. It means a lot to me. In the previous installment of the story, we had Urza ending up on a journey to the Manor Rig. But he was stopped on this journey by a group of Viashino that were accompanied by their champion, a mighty drake by the name of Ramadaragaz. And so our story picks up with Urza squaring off against the drake. Now, to understand Urza's mindset at this point, you need to know there was absolutely no concern in Urza's mind about how this could go. He had any number of options in terms of instantly destroying this drake. He could call down lightning, cause him to explode, summon up beasts to tear him apart. But Urza had learned a lot in his 3,000 years of life. And one of the things that he had learned was to be more subtle when dealing with new individuals and to hide his power. Don't give away too much. So this is running through his head as he's sizing up the drake and deciding the approach that he's going to take, right? So he's decided to basically use a light touch in this situation. Now, Ramadaragaz sees Urza considering him and essentially takes what's going on for Urza being overly arrogant and says as much, to which Urza responds that he is not arrogant, merely absolutely confident, right? So he basically calls on the drake. He beckons him, let's do this, let's make this happen, sort of scenario. So Ramadaragaz basically immediately starts charging at Urza, happy to oblige him to use his gigantic, powerful drake body to destroy this interloper who should not be here. Now, Urza decided what he was going to do was just harden all of his clothing so that no matter how much force the drake was to use, it would not penetrate the clothing and thus obviously not Urza as well. So Ramadaragaz ends up charging up, snatching Urza up into the air, Urza remaining perfectly calm in this scenario, right? No, like the drake is squeezing as hard as he can and it's having absolutely no effect on Urza whatsoever. Ramadaragaz has him up in the air and says, you have two options. I can take you to the dungeon or I can destroy you right here and now. To which Urza calmly responds, release me and take me to your king. Now Ramadaragaz spits out, the bay does not meet with beggars. You have seen our sacred lands. At this point, you are our captive or your life is over. Those are your options. Urza, again, still absolutely calm, even though he's being dangled in the air by a massive drake, basically says, this is not going to go the way that you expect. Let me go and take me to see the bay being the leader of all Viashino, right? So this ends up just enraging Ramadaragaz. You have to understand that he is the champion of these Viashino. He is more powerful than anyone else in the community that he resides in. So he's used to being treated with a certain level of respect, right? And so to have what to his eyes is just a regular human being getting so mouthy with him, it drives him to madness. So what he actually does is he opens his mouth wide and he just jams Urza right into his mouth. Now, as this is happening, Urza grabs a hold of two of his teeth. He grabs one of the bottom teeth and one of the upper teeth, and with very little effort, just essentially just shoves Ramadaragaz's mouth even like more open. If you've ever watched something where some beast gets a giant stick stuck in their mouth and they can't close it, that was essentially what was going on with Urza here. So Ramadaragaz he's trying with all of his might to slam his jaws shut on Urza. Absolutely no luck with that. So he decides to bathe Urza in his acid breath. He just starts blasting acid breath directly out of his mouth onto Urza, and it has zero effect. At this point, Ramadaragaz is just so frustrated that he grabs Urza from his mouth and just throws him as far as he can. But unfortunately for the Drake, as Urza was being grabbed and thrown, he basically firmed up his grip on the one tooth in the bottom jaw, and that tooth came with him. He just yanked the tooth straight out of Ramadaragaz's mouth, right? And at this point, Ramadaragaz is just howling with pain, and Urza is taking less of a calm approach and more of a commanding approach. He essentially commands to be taken to the bay. And Ramadaragaz, unfortunately, because of his ego and anger, was not ready to back down. Here he is in front of the tribe that he is a champion of. So as Urza stands there holding his tooth, Ramadaragaz blasts twin flames out of both of his nostrils, and these flames wash over Urza, right? And Urza's just standing there while nothing's happening to him. The Viashino fled. Now, Urza decided to add a little twist of showmanship here. So what he did was he basically blinked himself away for a moment. And then as soon as the flames from Ramadaragaz's nostrils ran out, they looked and nobody could see a sign of Urza, right? The Viashino, most of them had crept away and were hiding behind rocks and things like that to watch what's going on. There's no sign of Urza as the smoke clears. And the Viashino start to kind of come back out from behind the rocks. And that's when Urza just reappears and he's holding the tooth still. And he says, okay, look, this is enough. Just take me to the bay at this point, right? And the Viashino that were assembled, they basically found the scenario hilarious, right? So all these hisses that were unmistakably laughter started to issue out of these Viashino as Urza was demanding to be taken to the bay. Now again, remember Ramadaragaz's station within their society, right? This just ends up pushing him over the edge. He is insane with rage at this point, being laughed at by his kinsmen, being shown up by this stranger. So his claws bit down into the earth as he crouched down to go into this massive muscled spring, right? So he is leaping in mid-air. And at this point, Urza's getting genuinely frustrated, right? He did not intend to spend this much time dealing with this scenario. He wants to get the Manor Rig up and running. He's got plans that he needs to keep moving. Phyrexia awaits. So at this point, Urza just waves his hand dismissively in the air, and Ramadaragaz is petrified mid-jump. So he's there, suspended in the air, turned perfectly to stone. At which point, Urza turns to the assembled Viashino, and he basically starts gesturing at them, holding the Drake's tooth, just waving it at them, going, okay, you need to take me to the bay. You had a champion, now you have a gargoyle. I'm not dealing with any more delays. Now, as he's saying this, the Viashino are backing away, but the largest one, the one that originally confronted Urza on the path in the previous episode, says, no, look what you did to our champion. There's no way we're going to take you to the bay, because what would you do to him? What are you going to do to our leader? Forget it. This is not up for debate. Now, at this point, Urza actually felt a bit heartened, because these are logical thoughts. It makes perfect sense for the Viashino to logically go, no, we're not going to take you to the leader. You're a genuine threat. Why would we do that? And the extension of them being logical is the fact that they could be reasoned with. So Urza decided to soften his approach at this point. Obviously, the more forceful route was not being, it wasn't working. So he essentially went up to Ramadaragaz in his stone form, kind of checked out the angle that he was going to land at, and grabbed onto his muzzle, shoved the tooth back into his mouth, instantly healing him while also undoing the petrification. So Ramadaragaz's momentum caused him to smash into a number of rocks. It left him sprawling, his wings all akimbo. Urza chuckled internally. He had a good laugh to himself, but he wasn't looking to make the situation any worse by rubbing it into the Drake. So he didn't actually voice the laughter. He found the situation to be amusing. Now, the Drake made its way back to his feet and realized with amazement that he had been made whole. He's like, my mouth, my jaw, it's back. It's healed. And at this point, Urza says, look, I could see the bay myself, but it might be even messier than this situation. So I really would like it if you would take me to the bay. I mean, I can harm and I can heal. The choice is yours. Urza watched as the leader of the Viashino and Ramadaragaz shared a glance. The leader nodded at Ramadaragaz, at which point the Drake turned to Urza and expressed his regret. Now, it was only half-hearted, right? Because obviously he's still hurting. He's got wounded pride. Urza decided to be nice and basically said, you know what? I understand. It is difficult to apologize in these situations. You are forgiven, and it took me many, many, many years to learn the same lesson that you've learned here. Now, if I could please be taken to see the bay. So Ramadaragaz bowed to Urza, and they led him off to meet with the bay. So while Urza was being led off to meet the bay, Joyra and Karn were back on the Isle of Teleria, dealing with protecting the Telerian Academy. Okay, this was going to be their first shift at a guard post since Urza had left the island to go and meet with the Viashino. So they were stationed at a guard post located in the eastern forest. It was a small and remote guard post. At most, they would have 3 guards in it, but Joyra and Karn were more than enough. Joyra would man the battlements, while Karn guarded the gate, watching through an arrow slit. Nothing ever escaped Karn's notice when he was on watch. He's a very diligent guard. Now, the tower they were in was set on one side beside a fast time rift. So the fast time rift itself acted as a form of defense, as it could destroy things just from the nature of the rift. But additionally, stationed inside the fast time rift were 80 Telerian runners and scorpions, like a total of 80 together. And on the other side of the tower, there was a cliff, and that area was guarded by pumas and falcons. So they had a ton of different ways to deal with the Ferexian threat. And Joyra was feeling old. While she still may physically be in her 20s because of the slow time water, she's no longer got the childish mind that led them to this situation. She's been through her vision quest, so she's feeling an adult now. Her childish fantasies had become adult nightmares at this point, as Carrick obviously was the reason they had such a problem right now, leading all those Ferexians against them. So her life had become a life of endless Ferexians spawning in the darkness and coming at her in waves. Joyra was feeling bored and nervous, so she tried to engage Karn in chat. Now, the experience was not satisfying since Karn was so focused on actually guarding the guardhouse, right? Making sure that the Ferexians did not bypass him. So Joyra would ask a question like, how many negators do you guess we're going to see tonight? And she would receive a response from Karn that was accurate but brief. Basically, Karn's response was, the average for this location is one during the daytime and 3 negators at night. Now, Joyra brings up the fact that this might actually change now that Urza's gone. This is our first night without Urza here, so maybe they're going to ramp up and try and sweep in with higher amounts of negators, but Karn really wasn't rising up to the conversation. He was very much focused on looking out and making sure no Ferexians were able to bypass their defenses. But Joyra, unfortunately, her mind continued down that path, thinking about the fact that Urza's gone off to her homeland. And she's kind of musing out loud, not sure if Karn's actually even listening to what she's saying. But anyways, Urza's gone off to her homeland. She hasn't even been there in 40 years, right? She doesn't even remember what it's like at this point, right? And she wouldn't even really recognize it. She's talking about how she'll probably never see it again. She'll never see her homeland again. Karn speaks up at this point, saying Urza stated that he'll be back for you. Now, Joyra is still caught up in this almost petulant sort of mind state. Well, she's like, yeah, but by then the mountains will be leveled. There'll be mass extinctions. He'll probably have enslaved the drakes. Now, Karn says, a bit sarcastically, oh, such faith in Urza. And Joyra snaps at this point. He's caused every big disaster in our world for the last 3,000 years, Karn. Did it not shock you to learn who Urza actually was? And Karn just chuckles at this. He says, look, Joyra, I'm a man made of silver. My best friend is 50 years old, but she looks like she's 20. And I live on an island where a day can pass in a minute or a year. So no, I'm not shocked, okay? And Joyra says, what are we going to do, though, if trouble arises? Really cutting to the heart of her anxiety, right? She at one hand, she's really angry at Urza, but on the other hand, she recognizes his power level and the threat of Phyrexia and is thinking about, okay, what's going to happen now that Urza isn't here? But it turns out, Karn explains, that Baron actually has a jewel-handled dagger that is a beacon. It's linked to a magical pendant that hangs around Urza's neck. Now, if Baron goes ahead and activates this beacon, it will essentially allow for Urza to be summoned instantaneously. Now, this isn't enough to mollify Joyra. She still is muttering about how he should have stayed. Urza should have still stayed here. The Phyrexians being here, that's his fault. Now, Karn's not having it. Basically, he turns around and says, look, no. Urza is a part of this too, but you and I are to blame for what's going on right now. We share this responsibility. Sure, Carrick came to the island because of Urza, but you and I, we're the ones who let him in. And that makes this our responsibility. Now, the conversation was interrupted as off in the distance, something large loomed. Some gigantic Ferexian was coming lumbering out of the woods. Now, because Karn was still paying attention in this situation, he was able to trigger the alarm rapidly. And so, right away, 5 runners instantly sped out of the fast time rift towards the gigantic Ferexian. Now, when this Phyrexian beast saw these Talarian runners heading towards it, it turned around and tried to lumber away. It tried to flee, but unfortunately for it, the runners were just too quick. So the Talarian runners end up catching up to this beast. They're firing all kinds of quarrels into it, and you can hear the Phyrexian shrieking out into the night air, right? And basically, from that point on, you start to hear these crazy meaty whacks as the runners start to slam their scimitars into the beast. But they're not trying to hack it up. What they're trying to do is just get their blades in deep enough, at which point all 5 of them go off in sequential self-destruction. So by one, they all blow up. And chunks of Phyrexian and pieces of the runner rain down around the forest. All that's left are essentially feet, claws, and a pile of like smoking rubble. The Phyrexian was absolutely, completely destroyed. So looking out over the destruction of the Phyrexian and the runners, Karn reiterates that he and Joyra are indeed responsible for this scenario, right? And Joyra, begrudgingly, she agrees. Now, over in Shiv, Urza is massively excited, but he's trying to contain it, trying to keep it under the surface. As he was escorted to the bay, the leader of the Viashino, he was able to get a much better look at the Manor Rig. So as they wandered through the Manor Rig, he was able to see all of these different things like coke chambers, mold rooms. Those would be rooms where you could design like molds to actually create devices, blast furnaces. The potential of the Manor Rig was very, very great indeed. This facility would be capable of creating far more than the necklace that hangs around Karn's neck currently, right? Like, you can do so much with this Theran technology. Now, all of this is running through Urza's head while he hides his excitement as he's led in to meet the Bay. Now, the Bay is actually a very regal and fierce-looking Viashino warrior who lords over the rest of them. He does show signs of age when Urza sees him, but he certainly radiates a lordly power. Now, because the Viashino do not share human anatomy, they don't use things like thrones as a show of power. Instead, what the Bey has is an ornate rail that's bejeweled, everything like that, as a status of his power. And this rail is set at the front of an embedded alcove in the Manor Rig. And all around this alcove are gigantic winding gears and all the different machinery that make up part of the Manor Rig. They essentially almost create a frame around him, right? It makes the Bey appear as if he's surrounded by arcane power. It really enhances that sort of rulership status that comes along with this. So he's standing there lordly, looking down among the assembled Viashino and Urza as well. So Urza decides that because of this grandiose setup, it's best to come in with his courtly manners. So he says, "Majesty, I am a planeswalker. I and all of Dominaria need your forge." Now, this proclamation was met with silence. The silence lengthened as the Bey gazed out over his people. His eyes hardened when his gaze settled on Ramadarigas. Obviously, the Bey was very dissatisfied with the champion and the fact that Urza had been allowed into these holy lands, right? Now, abruptly, the silence was broken by the Bey speaking up and saying, "What do you intend to use this forge for?" Now, Urza actually was not expecting this sort of a response. So he took a moment, gathered his thoughts, and says, "I intend to build machines, specifically living machines." And at that point, he summoned up the blueprints, the schematics to Karn, and he rolled them out for the Bey to be able to look them over and draw his own sort of conclusions, right? So as he's rolling out the plans, he says, "I intend to make men like these, made of Thran metal, to defend our world." So the Bey stared at the schematics. He stared deep and hard into the schematics, attempting to understand what they really meant. And then he looked at Urza and said, "These machines, they will work?" Urza says, "I will bring proof to you. I have an older version of this specific design. The metal it's made of is too soft. However, it is 100% functional." Again, Urza is met with silence after making this statement. And Urza, he's not used to being made to wait, right? He's a very powerful individual who can usually get his way very rapidly. Unfortunately, he did realize in this case that the Viashino, they're required. These are the individuals who know how to use the Manor Rig. So figuring out how the Manor Rig works and bringing in new people to work the Manor Rig would be a lot more effort than simply getting the Viashino on his side, right? That's the most logical thing to do in this scenario. They are the ones who know the secrets of making Thran metal. Because at this point, Urza doesn't know how to use the Manor Rig to make this Thran metal. So it's going to go a lot faster if the Viashino will help him construct the metal and make essentially Thran metal Karns. So this basically leads to Urza waiting on the Bey's response instead of hastily demanding something in an impatient manner, right? So after a long silence, the Bey spoke. "You can use the forge on 2 conditions." Urza's excitement grew when he realized that the Viashino were 100% going to be willing to work with him. Now, yes, he did have to meet their conditions, whatever they would turn out to be, but Urza's an incredibly powerful planeswalker, so going ahead and meeting whatever conditions these lizard men had would most likely not be too difficult. So he was eager to hear what they had to say, but he tried to remain composed nonetheless, right? So he asked, "Okay, what are the conditions that you would like me to meet for you to help me?" And so the Bey says, "The first is we have an ancient enemy." Urza interrupts, "The goblins, I saw them when I was coming in. I can clear them up for you, no problem. The Bay responds, no, they are definitely not the concern. We're aware of them, but our real problem is the great fire drake, Garadaragaz. And Garadaragaz is the mother of the Viashino champion Ramadaragaz. Essentially, since Ramadaragaz had joined the Viashino, Garadaragaz had been a massive problem for them. She had just been launching attacks against their community over and over because she wanted her son back. She wanted her son to come back to living with her, and she felt like essentially her son had been cajoled and tricked into joining up with the Viashino, but we can get further into that later on in the story. All you need to know at this point is that Urza is being tasked with halting her attacks. He's not required to destroy her, it's just do whatever you can to get her to stop attacking us. Now, for this condition, Urza had no concerns whatsoever, right? I mean, obviously, he handled Ramadaragaz with zero problems. His mother, being an older, more powerful drake, is still going to most likely pose no problem whatsoever. So Urza happily agrees, as this first condition is going to be absolutely no issue for him. And he inquires as to what the second condition is. Now, the second condition he was wholly unprepared for, as the Bay spoke and said, you give to us as our own property forever your prototype metal man. Urza was completely unprepared for them to make this request. So as a result, he actually stopped and had to think for a moment. He paused and he said, this is a very big sacrifice that you ask of me. And Urza's looking all around the Manor Rig, thinking about the potential and weighing it against the fact that literally he's going to have to turn Karn over to these Viashino to meet these conditions, and Karn would become their property, thus no longer being a part of Urza's group. So he's weighing this scenario back and forth, his silver metal man versus the ability to make all of these Thran metal individuals that he wants to create. So as in response to him saying that this was a big sacrifice, the Bay nods and explains that among the Viashino, sacrifice for the tribe is the highest honor. So Urza making this sacrifice is an honor. The idea of Karn also being the one to make the sacrifice is an honor. So these thoughts to the Bay, it's basically like, yeah, of course I'm asking you for a big sacrifice. That's how you prove, you know, what we're doing here is worthwhile and giving us something worth our time. So Urza could see the wisdom in that. He understood. He thought about all the sacrifices he had made over the years, because Urza sacrificed so much in his war against Phyrexia, right? So he thought about all the sacrifices that he had made, and every sacrifice that he had made, when basically contrasted against the struggle he is having with Phyrexia, they all fell away. Any number of sacrifices was totally worth it if it meant defeating the Phyrexians. So Urza opened his mouth and sealed Karn's fate with a single sentence. Yes, you may have him. All right, my friends, that ends this intense installment of the Timestream Chronicles. Poor Karn is going to be traded away to the Viashino. What a way to end an episode, right? So let me know what you guys thought about all of this. If you like what I'm doing here, genuinely consider joining my Patreon, because I'll be honest with you, these videos take an incredible amount of time between me writing out all the notes, recording the video, and then all the amount of time that it takes to edit in all the fantastic images and stuff like that, which is done by my lovely lady Carly. We put in many, many hours on these videos, and YouTube ad revenue is a pittance. You can spend forever making a video and make $1. And I would very much like this to be an ongoing project where I can make lore forever, and I don't want to have to insert ads throughout the videos. I really like having a video where just at the beginning and the end maybe there's an ad, but there's nothing interrupting the entire flow of the video. But all that is only possible if I have support on Patreon. So if you want to see more lore videos, genuinely consider joining up. It makes a huge difference, and we can make this a project that lasts for years and years. Either way, thanks for coming by, my friends. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more glorious lore, you can subscribe for more as well. And all that being said, I'm going to leave now. So remember, my friends, lore is life.